Om Asato Ma Sadagamaya Tamaso Homaham Jyotirgamaya Mrityormam Amritam Gamaya Avir Avir Maedhi Rudra Yate Dakshinam Mukham Tena Maham Pahi Nityam. Om, lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness unto light. Lead us from death to immortality. And reach us through and through ourselves, and evermore protect us from ignorance by thy sweet, compassionate face. So my subject this morning is the three modes of nature. And we're going to be talking about the three gunas: Satwa, Rajas, and Tamas. Three principles that are postulated to account for all of the behavior of compound things. We could call it the tri-unity of nature. Those three principles, those three causal powers, those three functions that characterize nature, external and internal. Now, this doctrine of the three modes of nature, this doctrine of the gunas, is a very ancient teaching. It appears maybe at first in the Upanishads. And I'm thinking of a particular line in the Shvetashvatara Upanishad, Ajam Ekam Lohita Shukla Krishnam. There is one unborn feminine principle, red, white, and black. So there we have the color coding. This doctrine was later taken up by the Sankhya philosophy, the yoga psychology. It is treated in some detail in the Bhagavad Gita, particularly in the 14th chapter, where you can read a whole spectrum of different guna analysis of different aspects of spiritual life. It appears to us also in the writings of the Greek philosopher Plato, where he talks about thumos, epithumos, and logistikon in the Republic. Now, it may be helpful, before we launch in, to give a little infrastructure to kind of get our mind into the location for understanding this worldview. As students of comparative religions, you can recall the teachings of the Chinese Taoism. And you know how in the Tao Te Ching of Lao Tzu, we read about the play of the principles of yin and yang. All of you are familiar with that famous symbol of Taoism, the circle with a sine wave through it. On one side it's black, and the other side it's white. The black is the yin, and the white is the yang. And the idea is that by the harmony of these two, we reach an intimate wholeness of the Tao. And so it is in Chinese Taoism. This doctrine of the yin and yang just kind of pervades all of their philosophy, stories of literature, their medical, pre-modern, pre-scientific medical thinking, their dietary yoga regimens for health. For example, in diet, fruits and vegetables are yin, meat and potatoes are yang. And we want to have a balance between the yin and the yang. So that's the Chinese Taoist perspective. The whole world is a play of the pairs of opposites. Now, this is a doctrine which, of course, we read about in wisdom traditions all over the world. But it's only in ancient times. We also read an additional doctrine emerges in ancient India, not of the dyad, but of the triad. A different perspective, it's not a contradiction, but it's a different perspective of the triunity of nature. It represents a higher generalization about reality. As you know, the triangle is the strongest geometric figure. And therefore, the triangle symbolizes strength, not only in philosophical thought and religious terminology, but in martial arts traditions and in many different aspects of life. So let's look here at this triad of nature. The three gunas, the word guna is a word that, and don't be intimidated by Sanskrit words. We want to incorporate them into our vocabulary as students of the wisdom of the East. The word vocabulary literally means like a thread or a string. We could say in English, we speak about a piece of twine. Twine means is that there are two threads which are twisted together, and it becomes a much stronger than one single thread. So we can imagine here that we're talking here about three different threads which are strung together to form what we would call nature. We could call it trine, the trine of nature. And so these are three substances, as it were, which form nature with a capital N, by which we mean in the Sankhya cosmology, prakriti, that is nature internal and external. Now, each of these gunas, there are three gunas, these are often spoken of as substances, but they're not three different substances. They're three functions of one substance. They're three perspectives and analysis of one substance, which we could call primal nature. And just as water sometimes appears as solid, sometimes as liquid, sometimes as gaseous vapor, and yet it's all three of those are variations of H2O. Similarly, it is with the gunas. Although we speak here of three, we're really variations. These are different phases or different powers, causal powers of one. Now, if we think about these three gunas, we can look at them maybe a little bit closer and to analyze them as That is, we're trying to wrap our brains around it. What is a guna? What are the gunas? That's why we have to walk around it a little bit. We can't just give a simple definition. We walk around the idea a little bit and try to understand it and to conceptualize it. We can think of each guna, that is each principle, as a focal point, as the center of a whole constellation of ideas. That is, of a set of ideas. And each one of those constellations includes a whole host of substances, adjectives, properties, behaviors, functions, ideas, all of which resonate, all of which radiate from the center and are, by the great law of association, are associated intimately with that focal causal power. So with this in mind, let's analyze these three categories, each one deriving from a causal substance. Our subject this morning is esoteric. It comes out of ancient, pre-modern, pre-scientific thought. And that's good, because the water is often clearest at the source. And therefore, we can look at each of these three gunas. Let's look first at Tamas. Now, Tamas, well, if we look a while, we could define these three gunas maybe as, if we talk of them as different variations of substance, we could say, okay, we could speak here of mass stuff. With the universe, look at the whole universe, we could divide it into three. Mass stuff, energy stuff, and intelligence stuff. That's the idea. There's not yin and yang, but rather there's mass stuff, energy stuff, and intelligence stuff. Let's look first at Tamas, the mass stuff. That is, the word Tamas literally means darkness. When you think about darkness, we think about sleep, we think about death. Life is, everyone is as if they are not, they've fallen asleep. We can think about that which is lifeless, that is dead, inert matter. The material world, everything in this material world, which is inanimate matter, has some resonance, has affiliation with this guna of Tamas. We can think here of in terms of the five elements. The lowest of the earth, air, fire, ether, air, fire, water, and earth. An ancient conceptualization of the basic elements of reality. Certainly, this guna of Tamas, we could correspond to the element of the earth. We could think of a stone. A stone is heavy, it's inert, it is lifeless. It is characterized by inertia. Maybe inertia is a good word for us to translate the word tamas. Anything associated with inertia in the external and the internal world. Now notice here, when we speak here of nature, we're talking here about external nature and internal nature. That is our own human nature. And that is, these gunas describe not only what we perceive in the world of the senses, but what we understand within our own analysis of our own mind, thinking, feeling, willing, and actions. So if the guna of tamas is inertia in the external world, associated with darkness, so also in the internal world, by the great law of correspondence. Whatever is outside, whatever is there is here. Yadeveha tadamutra, tadamutra tadanvaya. Whatever is here is there. Whatever is there is here. Whatever is in the macrocosm outside is within, corresponds within the microcosm within. So tamas within, the guna of tamas within, manifests in the form of darkness, that is, of ignorance, of dullness of mind, of associated by the yoga psychologists with a mind which is, with the tension which is fully scattered, and with a with weakened will, and with an attitude with an inertia approach to life. That is, with a kind of a laziness, a kind of a slowness of mind that manifests, well, in our behavior. And any time that we can see ourselves within our own dwelling place, and everything is a mess, and everything is in disorder, that's symptom that we're aligned with this guna of tamas. Disorder, chaos, lack of law and order, lack of the controlling reason. This tamas manifests then in our thinking. It manifests in feelings. The feelings aligned with this guna of tamas are those which are dark and those which are negative. Dark emotions like anger, like hate, like fear, negative feelings like fear, like depression, sadness. These are all weakness of mind and will associated with the guna, workings of the guna of tamas, that is the nature, our inner nature. This tamas is associated, that manifests by the law of association, thoughts, feelings, speech, and action. In spiritual life, we tend to our outward behavior and to our mental behavior. Sometimes we neglect to focus on our speech karma. That is, our speech is mirrors our thinking and our feeling manifests in the form of speech. And tamasic speech, well, let me clarify. When I say tamasic speech, the word tamas is the noun. The word tamasic, tamasika is the Sanskrit adjective. The English adjective is adding an Indo-European ik form, which, although it's a barbarism, it's still widely used, so we can say tamasic. That's our adjective. So we have tamas, and we have tamasic with an IC ending. So that's that. The speech, tamasic speech, that means speech aligned with the guna of tamas, is speech which is unthoughtful, inconsiderate, vulgar, often profane and obscene. That's untruthful, hurtful, angry speech. It's associated also with all of the other aspects of manifests in our behavior. It manifests in our preferences for food and drink. Food, which is like junk food, fast food, deep fried foods, foods which are heavy and which are malnourishing, which drag the mind of the yogi. This is all from the point of view of yoga sadhana. It drags the mind of the yogi down and out, and therefore it's called tamasic. That's the tamasic food. Tamasic food, tamasic drink associated with intoxicating liquors, a beer and hard liquors. So we kind of get a constellation of ideas, thinking, feeling, the thoughts, feelings, speech, behavior, all of which go together to form the associated here with the guna of tamas, associated with the very lowest level, if we think in terms of the ancient system of the 7 chakras. We know how it goes from the Muladhara chakra up to the Sahasrara. The lowest chakra level is associated here with this guna of tamas, that is self-preservation and physical self-security. Now let's look here at a second constellation, that of Rajas. Rajas is the noun, Rajasic is the adjective. It's associated with the elements in the form of the 5 elements, not with the earth element, but rather with the element of water and fire. This is Rajas. This is the element. This is the guna, which we call an energy stuff. Things in movement, things in motion. In the external world, that is, Rajas displays itself in the form of wind, in the form of rain, a hurricane, a cyclone, a volcano. All of these are violent, extreme activities and motion in external nature. Similarly, it is in the internal. The principle of Rajas is about the energy, movement, the movement of energy within us. Color-coded with the color red. That is, if the tamas is the black, the red, the white, and the black, the Rajas is the red, associated in the mind. The mind of the Rajasic person is always active, always moving, always busy. No time to stop, no time to rest, no time to meditate. And as a result of which, moved and driven by the passions, they're not inert, but they are moving, they're always in movement, riding the roller coaster of life, happiness, misery, success, failure. And so like this is a roller coaster of emotions, which associated here with the guna of Rajas. This is the activity of the Rajasic mind. If we think of the mind as a lake, we can think of the lake of the mind as being the lake of Tamas. That lake is, maybe we can imagine, just a stagnant lake, which is, we can't see through the water. It's just muddy water. We can't see anything. Nothing is moving. Whereas in the lake of the mind of the Rajasic person, there's tremendous movement, at least on the surface. The waves of the lake of the mind are being churned up by desires and by intentions and by passions. And so the Rajasic person is always engaged in intense activity. The speech of the Rajasic person, Rajasic speech, is excessive. It's exaggerated. It's speech that has as its content a kind of what we would call a worldly content. That means talking about gossip or current affairs or business or politics. That's the preferred content of the speech of the Rajasic, the mind characterized by the predominance of the guna of Rajas. It manifests all the way through, from thinking to feeling to speech to our actions. And in our behaviors, our likes and dislikes associated with the guna of Rajas. Those likes, for example, in our foodstuffs. When we eat, the food preferred by the Rajasic, under the guna of the influence of the guna of Rajas, maybe people are driven to go out and to wine and dine in fine restaurants and order a wide variety of foods, preferring food which is highly seasoned and spicy, and choosing drinks which are like maybe fine wines, or stimulating drinks like coffee, tea, or sparkling sodas. These are associated in yoga psychology, associated with the control here of an aspect of our inner nature, which we could call the guna of rajas. Now let's compare that now with a third category, that is the guna of Satwa. Tamas, Rajas, and Satwa. Satwa is the easiest of the three words here. The Rajas just means dust. It just, if you can think of maybe a dust storm is a good example. The wind is blowing and the dust is flying all around, and it's kind of, you're confused. Everything is in a mass of confusion and movement and activity. That's Rajas. But etymologically, the easiest word here to analyze is this word Satwa. Satwa, of course, comes from a very fundamental root stem, which is Sat, which we're equated with, which means reality. It means existence. Satyam means truth. It means goodness. These are all words that are translations of the Sanskrit word Sat. Satwa. Satwa is the noun. Sattvic is the adjective. And we can say that Satwa is what we would call intelligence, the intelligence stuff, the spiritual intelligence, the spirituality. If you were to ask you, what is spirituality? It's Satwa. It's the predominance of the guna of Satwa. Satwa means we can associate it in the five elements: ether, air, fire, water, earth. Satwa is associated with the elements of ether, of space, and of air. And when we think about Satwa, we can think about when we look in the external world around us. We're not looking at the earth and heavy rocks and stones, and we're not looking at the movement of the wind and the rain, but rather on a beautiful, clear, bright, sunny day, all that we see is sunshine. All that we can see all around us is clear blue skies. This is the guna of this is the association here of the guna of Satwa. Think of the upward movement of the mind. Think of a balloon, which is just loosened helium balloon. It floats up into the clear blue sky. These are the associations with the word Satwa. Is the external nature, manifests also in our internal nature, our own human nature, that is, in our thoughts, our feelings, speech, and action. And just as in the external world, we can think here of space and of that calm clarity of the world around us. Similarly, we can think of the mind and the higher intelligence. Satwa is associated with our higher mind, not with the body. It's not associated with the body, which is gross and inert. It's not associated with the mind, which is ever in activity, ever in action, but with a higher intelligence, that is the witness consciousness. That is, we could call the higher awareness. Our higher awareness. It's the predominance of the highest body, the Vijnana Maya Kosha. That is the mind which is characterized by discrimination and renunciation and right thinking and right thought. If you want to think about Satwa means, if you go to the Buddhist reference, Buddha in the eightfold, the Noble Eightfold Path, he characterized it as a right, that whole, there's a whole list, right views, right intentions, right speech, right actions. Like this, he goes through this five. Everything has it in front of it, the adjective, the right views, right speech, the right act. These are all sattvic. Right speech, right thinking, higher thinking. The sattvic mind is characterized by that mind which is calm and which is clear. And the lake of the mind, yoga psychology, we use that analogy of the lake of the mind. The lake of the mind, we look down through the lake, we can see clearly to the bottom because there's no impurity. That is, it's when the water is pure and when the water is concentrated, that means when it's pure water, there's nothing else in it, we can see clearly right through to the bottom. That's the sattvic mind. The sattvic mind also on the surface is calm and placid and reflects the sun shining in the sky above. There's no waves, there's no upset. The mind is not upset by the turbulence of desire and passion, but is rather calm and detached and lucid, and we would say spiritual. So we want to know, what is spiritual? Spiritual means sattvic. Spiritual means that it has all the qualities associated with this aspect of the highest vibration of nature. You know, in external and internal world is characterized by levels of vibration. There's a whole spectrum of consciousness. The low consciousness at the lowest level of the heaviest, slowest vibrations is called tamasic, associated with those emotions and feelings which we are acquainted when our mind is at a low point. But as we modulate up a little higher in the octaves, then we come to the middle, the more medium portion, feelings of different kinds of emotions and feelings associated with the guna of rajas. And the highest vibrational level, we can say. This doctrine of vibration, of course, this is not a New Age philosophy. This doctrine of vibration is a very ancient teaching, goes all the way back to the Rig Veda. So the highest level of the vibration, that is the finest, the subtlest level of vibration in our own human consciousness, is associated with those sattvic feelings: calm, detachment, discrimination, right views, good judgment. It manifests by the great law of correspondence, association. It'll manifest in our thoughts and our feelings, manifest in our speech. Sattvic speech is that speech which is truthful, which is kind, which is beneficial, and which always is a preference to speak in its content. Its content is always prefers to be that of speaking of soul, God, and religion. That's the sattvic speech. Sattvic in our own manifests in our own likes and dislikes, our preferences for food and drink. Sattvic food is that food which is plain and simple, which is healthful, which is nourishing, which empowers us, which makes our bodies and our minds stronger. As in contradistinction to other foods, which drag our mind down and make the mind more active and confused. So this is the sattvic diet. Sattvic diet. Of course, the sattvic drink is pure water. That's the drink of the yogis. And so here we have the three constellations, three sets of ideas and behaviors and adjectives and feelings and external images and internal associations, each one kind of going back to that central causal power, which we call a guna, which are different modifications of primal nature. Now, if we look at these three gunas, we can see that everything in this world, is composed of all three of these principles. There's nothing in this world which is purely one or the other, because there's only one thing, and it's nature. And so it's just going to be different constellations or different proportions or different of these three gunas. That is, anything that we see could be described in different ways. We could say, for example, a rock. Now, from one point of view, a rock is a good example of inertia and of lifeless matter, and therefore we could say it's kind of aligned with the guna of tamas. On the other hand, if that rock were to be rolling down a steep mountain, and it would gain tremendous kinetic energy and movement, then we would say that that very rock, which we described first as being tamasic in form, has actually become very rajasic. Similarly, when the rock reaches the bottom, it reaches its own equilibrium state. We could imagine that maybe we would go and get that rock and we would polish it and polish it. We would find that it was a precious gem and that it sparkled and shined in the sunlight. And thus, it has sattvic qualities. And so we can see that we could describe the same thing, the very same object, from different perspectives, from different points of view, as having sattvic qualities, rajasic qualities, and tamasic qualities. And that's why we have to be careful and use discrimination when we begin to employ this terminology, because we have to use we have to look carefully to see what we are discriminating, and oftentimes extremes look alike. And it may be the extreme Satwa looks very much like extreme Tamas. A bright light, you look into the sun, this is blinding. That is, you can't see. In fact, in spiritual life, Swami Vivekananda in one place says that 90% of those people who we perceive as being compassionate and loving and caring and spiritual, and then who we think are great examples of spirituality and sattva, are actually being driven by the most dire tamas. So that's a statement of Swami Vivekananda. In other words, extremes often look alike, and therefore we have to use discrimination before we analyze and decide what's what. Now let's look a little bit about the evolution of the gunas. The gunas are three principles of nature. Nature evolves. And it evolves through two different phases of a great cycle, which we call involution and evolution. The first phase, which we could call primary evolution or involution, is described to us by the Sankhya philosophy. That is, in the beginning, nature, the three gunas, that is, these three principles, these three causal principles are in equilibrium. Everything is in perfect harmony. And then at the beginning of creation, that harmony is disturbed, and there begins to become an interplay of the forces of these three principles. And the first thing to manifest in creation is intelligence. From intelligence comes forth controlled by the lineage here of the three gunas. That is, the mind and discrimination from the sattvic aspect of intelligence, rajasic aspect, behold our physical organs of action, and from the tamasic aspect, the subtle elements, So we have here it goes from, you see the progression, causal, subtle, and then those subtle elements recombine to form gross elements, which generalize here as the 5 elements of the world around us. So here we find the first phase of evolution is from causal to subtle to gross. Now today, in our condition today, we find ourselves somewhere around in the cycle. We're down here about 6 o'clock. The evolution, we're not concerned with involution, we're concerned with evolution. As evolution, as human beings, each one of us, we have a telos. We have a goal, we have a destiny, we have a purpose. Our purpose is to unfold, our purpose is what? It's self-actualization, it's self-realization, to be who we really are. That's our purpose. And therefore, in struggling to be who we really are, we are going to evolve. And therefore, we begin to evolve from the gross to the subtle to the causal. That's the progression. Just the opposite of the involution. Our goal is to move from the unconscious to the conscious to the superconscious, from the subtle to the more complex to the highly complex, and from the lower to the higher. That's the movement, from the lower to the higher. Those of you who are students of psychology, you know about Abraham Maslow's pyramid of values and how it's how you put all of our human values and our human needs can be characterized there as a hierarchy. And there are things which are associated very clearly, very simply with the 7 centers of yoga psychology. The purpose of life is to move from the lower to the higher. And in so doing, that's what we call growth. Growth means that we're at a lower state, we go up to a higher, we identify from that, we differentiate, transcend, include, and thus move to a higher stage. Differentiate from that stage, transcend that stage, include that stage from a higher perspective. That's growth. So in terms of the 3 gunas, now we have the evolution of the gunas from the lowest, that is from tamas to rajas to sattva, sattvic qualities. Those of us who are concerned here, interested in our own personal growth and spiritual life, so we're thinking those 3 kind of stages of growth. Now here it's interesting to look at these stages. We can see that in the process of personal growth, we can't skip stages. This is one of the principles of yoga psychology associated with this doctrine of the gunas. We can't skip stages. That means when you go to school, you go to 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, on through the grades. And it may be you're a very clever, bright guy, and you can jump from the 3rd grade to the 5th grade, maybe. Maybe in rare cases. But unfortunately, once you skip grades, you find there's stuff you missed. And so there's always going to be things that is in the hierarchy of progression, of evolution. In principle, we can't skip stages. We are always going to have to go back, something that we've neglected in our evolution, along the lines of development. There's many different lines of development in our psyche. On any one of those lines, we have to go through all of the stages. That is, we have to evolve from that constellation of tamas, rajas, sattva. Let me give you an example of that from the life of Sri Ramakrishna. This is a psychological example of how this principle works. Sri Ramakrishna had two disciples, young boys. Maybe they were 14, 16 years old. They would visit their master at Dakshineshwar. One was named Niranjan, and the other was named Yogin. Now, one day, Niranjan came down to the banks of the river Ganges. He's going to cross over the river Ganges to get to the temple of Dakshineshwar to see his master, Sri Ramakrishna. He gets into the ferry boat, and in those olden days, this was of a ferry, kind of a ferry boat, which is the ferryman has a long pole, and so he poles out and warps into the current. It's not a very big boat. But Niranjan is in the boat, and in that boat there are two very worldly merchants. And they were, as the boat moved out into the current of the river, they began talking about local holy men, and particularly the saint of Dakshineshwar, and began to ridicule those saints and so-called saints and devotees. Now, Niranjan, hearing this, Niranjan was a young boy. He was very high-spirited. He was a little bit hot-tempered. He was very outspoken and assertive. And when he heard those words disparaging his guru, his master, he asked these baniyas, that means these worldly businessmen, "Stop, please don't say anything more." And they, of course, were startled to even hear this impudent young man speaking to them. They continued on as before, and he says, "Okay, well, you won't stop? Well, very good. Then I'm going to sink this boat." He stood up, put one foot on one side of the boat, one foot on the other, began to rock the boat back and forth. And, of course, they were terrified. They thought, okay. This way, they got to the other side of the river. And Niranjan made his way to the room there, talking to Sri Ramakrishna. And in the course of conversation, he related this incident. And Sri Ramakrishna looked at him, and he was rather vexed with his behavior. And he scolded the boy, saying, "Well, why did you do that? What a terrible, impulsive thing that was. You endangered the lives of those poor men. Why didn't you just withdraw your mind? What did it bother you? You should have just ignored it." And that was his lesson. Now, the very next day, another disciple, this was Yogin. Now, Yogin came down. He was also going to cross the river at the same point, and there was that same ferry boat. He got on the boat, and there were those same merchants with their same disparaging remarks riding in the boat. But Yogin was a different personality type. That is, he was very shy, very soft-spoken, retiring, almost timid, introspective, indrawn. He heard what they were saying, but he just withdrew his mind within and ignored them. And so the boat crossed to the other side. He made his way to the room of Dakshineshwar. In the course of the conversation, he discussed what had happened, and Sri Ramakrishna, his guru, looked at him and was vexed with him and scolded him, saying, "Well, what is this? What kind of a disciple are you? You hear your own guru, spiritual teacher, being maligned, and you don't say anything? You don't speak up? You just ignore it? Don't you have any kind of, where is your inner spirit?" So that was the lesson that Yogin got on that occasion. Here we can see the contrast, the play of how the master, leading the disciple, one of whom, Niranjan, was under the control of the guna rajas. He needed to graduate to Satwa, be more calm and detached. Whereas Yogin, we could say, at least in that psychological state of being kind of shy and timid, he needed to learn to be more assertive. That is, assert his spirited, energetic nature in order to make progress. So like this, we can analyze different aspects of our spiritual life, the places that we visit. All of these are subject to an analysis of these three gunas. And you could read in the 14th chapter, 15th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, where they go into much more detail about how anything that we consider, whether it be our worship, whether it be our charitable activities, whether it be our tapas, our spiritual practice, whether it be people, places, things, we have now a tool that enables us to conceptualize and to do some spiritual discrimination and analysis. That's the beauty of this yoga doctrine. It's going to give us tools and conceptual so we can conceptualize and discriminate different vibrational levels with both an external nature and an internal nature, with our purpose being to grow. By grow, what we mean by grow is we mean to evolve. We mean that nature evolves. It's not our spirit, it's not our consciousness that is evolving, but it's nature is evolving. And as nature evolves, our spiritual consciousness becomes more manifest. So that's our goal, both in personal development, if our goal is self-actualization, or in spiritual life, where our goal is self-realization. Same principles holds true. And the usefulness of this analysis of where we're at in different lines of development. Are we at the lowest vibrational level? What are our lines of development? Physical, emotional, interpersonal, intellectual, spiritual, all of these different lines of development we can analyze from within these categories. Now, the three gunas are three principles that are posited to explain the behavior of all composite things in nature. And we're talking, they characterize the behavior of nature. But in the goal and purpose of our spiritual life is to control nature, both external and internal, and to rise above nature. The teaching of the Vedanta philosophy is that you are not nature, that you have a human nature, but in your true self, you are pure consciousness. You are the spirit that is consciousness, that is your soul, your body, your mind, and you have your soul. Your soul is different from your mind and from your body. And the body is the material flesh and blood body, characterized by the guna of Tamas, the mind by Rajas, and the Sattvic, that is the spiritual your higher self, we could say. We could say your spiritual intelligence, characterized by the guna of Satwa. So that's the progression. But it doesn't stop there, because even though we have developed Satwa in our own psyche, our goal is to transcend the three gunas and to transcend nature. And therefore this idea of the gunas involves gross, subtle, causal, and then transcending the causal. And as to that, there's a parable of Sri Ramakrishna. There was once a man who had left the village and was on his way home. And walking home, he went over hill and dale, and had to pass through a dark forest. Passing through the forest, he was waylaid by highwaymen who stopped him. They stripped him of his clothes. They robbed him of all his belongings. And then there he was, just lying there in the midst of the trees. And one of the robbers said, why don't we just finish him off and kill him? And the second robber said, well, they don't have to go that far. Why don't we just tie him up? That way we make our escape. There'll be no problem. So they agreed, and they tied the man hand and foot, and there they left him in the forest. And they were gone. And time passed, became darker and colder, and the man was all tied up. What could he do? He was in terrible, terrible condition. And lo and behold, who was to appear there but maybe the third robber? He'd had second thoughts. And after the others had escaped, he gave it a roundabout way, and he returned. And he said, you know, sir, I'm so sorry that we had to rob you. That's what we are. We're robbers. But here, let me loosen you. He untied him, and then he helped him stand up and led him out through the trees to the road, led him down the road till they came to the top of the hill, and he pointed out, he said, look down there, you see there's your house down there. Why don't you go now and go back home? And the poor man, he was so grateful to that robber, even though he was who he was. He said, well, thank you very much. You've helped me very much. Why don't you come home with me? I'll give you something to eat and drink. And the robber said, no. He said, thank you very much, but I'm a robber. I can't go down there into your village because they would say that I'd be apprehended by the police. So I'll just leave you here. So in this way, the three robbers, of course, are the three gunas. First robber is Tamas. He wants to kill us. That drags our mind down and out. The second robber is Rajas. It binds us. The third is Satwa. That is the Satwa guna. Under the influence of Satwa, we're freed from many of our bondages, many of our liberations. We've graduated from Tama to gross to subtle to causal. But even then, in yoga psychology, that is the law of karma. Now we're talking here about the great chain of the law of karma. We're bound hand and foot. We're still bound. Because even the iron chain, there's we bound by an iron chain, bound by a silver chain, or bound by a golden chain. And all three bind us. And therefore, we need therefore the high ideal of the yogis and of the saints and sages is to go beyond nature, to transcend nature, and to realize our true self. So our subject this morning was a little esoteric, and evoking Sanskrit words. Don't be intimidated by Sanskrit words. They're the language of the wisdom of the East, the language of philosophy. Help us to clarify and to discriminate more finely. And these words, by the way, have been already gobbled up by the omnivorous, multicultural English language and can be found in any Webster's Desktop Collegiate Dictionary. Any search of your online English dictionary immediately will turn up these words, Satwa, Rajas, Tamas. They're not strange, bizarre words. Very good for us as students of spiritual life and of the wisdom of the East to incorporate those words into our vocabulary and into our common parlance. And to remember the ideal of moving from the lower to the higher and ultimately to transcending all of the aspects of nature to realize our true self.
So next week, our Sunday lecture will be Swami Sumanasananda speaking on Holy Mother in the eyes of Swami Vivekananda. Next week in observance of Thanksgiving, there will not be a class on Thursday night or on Friday night, but the Tuesday and Wednesday classes will continue. Were there questions?
We'll do this later in the
Okay, we'll take the questions unless there are online questions. But there will be a question and answer session in the living room there.
Yeah.
Okay? All right. Let's go.
Yeah, please join us in the green room immediately afterwards if you have any question or commentary or pushback or confusion or objection.
We have refreshments out there.
And we have refreshments, yes. You get your coffee and join us in the green room if you're interested. Om Dyo Ho Shantihi Antariksha Shantihi Prithivi Shantihi Apa Shantihi Oshadaya Shantihi Vanaspataya Shantihi Vishwe Deva Shantihi Brahma Shantihi Sarava Shantihi Shantireva Shantihi Same Shantirehi Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. Om. Peace is in heaven, peace is on the earth, peace is in the sky and the waters. The herbs and plants and trees are full of peace. The gods are peaceful. May this eternal universal peace enter our souls and beings. Om. Peace, peace, peace be unto us all.